Good morning and welcome to the 2022 University of Minnesota Legislative Kickoff. It's a pleasure to see you all virtually this morning as we officially launch the university's 2022 legislative advocacy effort. I want to welcome our alumni across the state and beyond who are joining us this morning, our students and staff at our 5 campuses and numerous research and outreach centers and extension offices, as well as our Board of Regents and elected officials from across Minnesota. We're grateful for your continued support of the U and your willingness to engage your friends, family, neighbors, and colleagues to advance our common goals and keep our institution strong today and into the future. Like so many of you, this past year has continued to be one of challenge, but also opportunity for the university. And despite strong headwinds, I'm proud to note we've seen many successes, including welcoming the largest, most diverse, most first-gen, and most Minnesotan class in decades. We exceeded the $1 billion mark in competitive research and development awards 2 years in a row for the first time in our history. And we recently established our PEAK initiative, which explores different ways to improve the delivery of our mission of teaching, research, and service by implementing more effective ways to operate. These efforts and many others, all guided by the university's new system-wide strategic plan, MPACT 2025, ensure the university's contributions remain strong for our state, our country, and beyond. We're excited then to begin another legislative session right here in Minnesota, and we're eager to share our story with elected officials around the state. The state's historic surplus presents lawmakers with a unique opportunity to drive investments and programs and projects that have a demonstrable return on that investment and will position the state for continued success in the years ahead. The university is ready to deliver on this opportunity and help drive our state's economy forward. Specifically, we're asking the legislature this year to build off the important investments they made last year by making a significant and critically needed investment in our capital infrastructure. This begins with providing the needed resources to maintain the over 30 million square feet of space we own across the system, allowing us to preserve and maintain what we already have. Higher Education Asset Preservation and Replacement, or HEAPR as we call it, is a term I'm sure you've heard before. It is state funding we depend on to repair, renovate, and fix aging buildings, classroom spaces, research labs, and other facilities on all of our campuses around the state. We've requested the funding necessary to address our growing shortfall in deferred maintenance, and will target these investments around the system and in communities across Minnesota. The capital request continues with investments in aging chemistry labs in the Twin Cities, obsolete science buildings in Duluth and at the Natural Resources Research Institute, and healthcare and research facilities to provide state-of-the-art patient care and greater capacity to reach rural communities in northern Minnesota by co-locating the medical school and pharmacy schools in Duluth to the emerging Duluth Medical District downtown in Duluth. And it concludes with the development of an integrated and advanced agricultural research and education complex dedicated to improving the health of animals, people, and the environment at local, regional, and global scales. And finally, our request demonstrates an unwavering commitment to provide a safe and sustainable campus environment through advanced measures in public safety, health and safety, information technology infrastructure, and student health and well-being. We've asked the state for additional resources in these critical areas, along with funding needed to make our campuses more affordable and more accessible for all Minnesotans. The strength of the U is built upon a strong partnership with the state of Minnesota. We can't continue these successes without advocates like you who engage with their elected officials and tell your story about our story and why the University of Minnesota is important to you. We're grateful you're here today to learn more and to get involved. So thank you again for joining us this morning, and thank you for supporting the University of Minnesota.
Thank you, President Cable. Good morning, everyone. My name is J.D. Burton, and I'm the Chief Government Relations Officer here at the University of Minnesota. It's my honor to lead the Government Relations team as we head into the 2022 legislative session, and it's an honor to have all of you here today as we learn more about our legislative requests. I want to thank President Cable, the Board of Regents leadership, and all of you for joining us this morning as we talk more about our efforts this legislative session. I'm going to take a few minutes to give a high-level overview of our legislative requests, as well as share a bit more about why I'm excited for the opportunity to engage with the legislature this year and how you as advocates can join us in this effort. It's the second year of the biennium at the legislature, which is typically a year where they will do a larger capital request. However, with the state's historic $7.7 billion surplus and an infusion of federal money, there's likely to be additional conversations around spending and tax relief as well. Accordingly, on December 17th, the Board of Regents approved a $935.6 million legislative request for the 2022 session. Composed of capital and budget projects and programs, the board's request will advance the university's strategic plan, Impact 2025, as well as help position Minnesota for success. It is a transformational request, significant in terms of dollars and potential impact. The university's capital request funds our infrastructure and facilities, where the budget request is focused on programmatic areas like public safety, affordability, and sustainability. I'll talk a bit more about the capital request below, as well as a bit more later on how we can learn and engage around the budget request itself. The university's capital request is highlighted by a $400 million investment in HEAPR, or asset preservation, to renew and replace our core facilities across the institution. Things like utility infrastructure, accessibility and safety, and basic building repair. We're also asking for projects related to build upon our strengths in the areas of chemistry and STEM, agriculture and natural resources, and health sciences. Other than HEAPR, which is funded 100% by the state, and in this year, our Farms Initiative, we are requesting the typical 2/3 of the cost of each project from the state, with the other 1/3 coming from non-state sources. You'll learn more about a few of these projects this morning, and you can always visit our website, our government relations website, for more information. The state's $7.7 billion surplus is an historic opportunity to make a significant investment in higher education. At no time in recent memory has the state had a surplus this large in the second year of the biennium. Added to this is the additional federal funding from the Recovery Act and the infrastructure funding that Congress has passed last year. State legislative leaders will spend the bulk of their effort in determining how to spend this funding, whether return it to taxpayers or some combination of both. And it's within this environment that the university will put its best foot forward to try to persuade state lawmakers that an investment in the University of Minnesota is a smart investment for our state's future economy. The budget surplus and transformational request also presents a unique opportunity for engagement by University of Minnesota advocates like yourself. Like you, I understand the value of the University of Minnesota to the state, and I'm eager to share my story about why the University of Minnesota matters to me and my family. I know that we are passionate about the university, and we have a strong desire to see the state, see the University of Minnesota succeed on behalf of Minnesotans across the state. I also know personally, how this request can benefit me, my family, and my community. I believe that having the University of Minnesota lead the way in creating new industries and opportunities, improving our accessibility to food and water, and protecting our environment will pay dividends in the future for me, my kids, and my family. I know that keeping our campuses safe matters. I know that making the university accessible and affordable matters. And as a Minnesotan myself, I want to see those things happen. But I know the University of Minnesota can't make that case to the legislature alone. Each of us needs to engage, share our stories, and help us move our state forward. Again, I'm glad you're with us today, and I'm excited to work with all of you. And for a quick review, please take a moment to stick around, learn more about some of our capital projects that the university is requesting this year, starting with HEAPR. Thank you.
This year at the state capitol, the University of Minnesota's top legislative priority will be higher education, asset preservation, and replacement funding, also known as HEAPR funding.
And it's what the university uses to preserve and renew infrastructure across the state within the university system.
HEAPR funding can be used for 4 types of projects: health, safety, and accessibility, building systems, utility infrastructure, and energy efficiency.
Quite often, you can update a building to serve new needs for a fraction of the cost of building a new facility. Every $1 in annual stewardship is worth $3 to $4 in future unplanned repairs or replacements.
HEAPR investment ensures improvement in the educational and research experience in university facilities for nearly all students and faculty across the system. For the historic Morris campus, HEAPR funds allow us to protect and renew assets that will make the campus more efficient and accessible. With over $5 billion in deferred capital renewal needs across the University of Minnesota system, HEAPR funding now is critical.
Appleby Hall is home to many programs and services aimed at meeting the needs of students, such as the Multicultural Center for Academic Excellence. However, its elevator, fire alarm, and sprinkler systems need to be upgraded. By funding these projects, you'll be directly investing in the safety of students.
The HEAPR projects for the University of Minnesota Crookston include projects such as the sprinkler fire suppression, natural gas line replacement, and electrical line replacement. All of these projects are upgrades to the campus infrastructure. You know, the thing about infrastructure is you don't really notice it when everything's working, but when things do break down, it can cause problems and issues in our heating, dining, or even a breach in student or employee safety that would no more than a couple of hours become a big issue. These projects must be completed.
Projects being done in the Humanities Building here at the University of Minnesota Duluth will greatly impact my educational career as a communications major and just as a student in general at the University of Minnesota Duluth.
It really helps students to be engaged and feel welcome in a bright environment with windows and all those aesthetic stuff that help people calm to study and do work and pay attention.
Living on the East Bank of campus but having most of my classes on West Bank, the Washington Avenue Bridge is my lifeline on campus. With your help, the Washington Avenue Bridge can continue to be a safe and easy pathway for the more than 10,000 students and faculty that cross it every day.
And fundamentally, I think that preserving these buildings, including some of these buildings that are 100 years old and listed on the National Historic Register, is a really important thing for the state and for the university. I think that overall, the request for the Morris campus is not a whole lot, and I can definitely say that we do need that money in order to keep things going. I think this will be a good start, and I hope that we will be able to come back again and continue to request money to update our aging and historic facilities.
I did get invited my junior year of high school to come here and do the VIP weekend, which is the multicultural weekend that the university offers for high school students. And after that experience, I was just like, oh my God, this is where I need to be. I love the energy, I love the campus. So walking into this space as a freshman, never having seen any of the science buildings here at the U, and knowing that the university is like a top-notch research facility, I was a little surprised just to even see whiteboards. The equipment was a little bit older, but the experience in here was still worthwhile. And in the hallway, you have to take into account that there's lecture going on. So there's other classes that are going on. So if you don't want to work in this space because you can't hear each other and you want to go out into the hallway, you run into the problem of some of those study areas are already being taken up by other students in other classes.
I decided to come to the University of Minnesota. I was just so drawn to the campus and just kind of like the experiences that I felt like there was a lot of opportunities for students at the University of Minnesota that I wouldn't have gotten at other universities. Minnesota is like such a big school and there's so much, money that's involved in like research and especially like the STEM program. So many incoming freshmen use the Gen Chem labs that I was expecting them to be a lot more up to date than they were. And so I'm disabled. And I was nervous going into having a 3-hour lab period every week. And it was kind of upsetting when I found out that there was not a lot of accommodations for students in the lab. Basically, the only thing that they could offer me was like a lab stool to sit on. And someone that has titanium rods fused to their spine, a stool does not do anything for me. It actually makes the pain worse. But I like how the chemistry department is family orientated. I feel like all of the professors are friends with each other and we're all very connected to each other.
When I had my tour, I honestly fell in love with it. I was my #1 choice for college. And like when I got in, I cried. I was so excited. So I think my expectations, I was thinking that it would be like a level up compared to like what my high school chemistry could provide. And though the education was awesome, the lab setup wasn't really like up to par by any means. And I think when I was a freshman coming through Gen Chem, I knew it was difficult to hear my TA. I knew it was difficult to like work with my group. But then when I actually taught Gen Chem, I didn't realize how difficult it was to actually like teach 20-some, 30-some students chemistry in a building like this lab and how it was designed and set up. What the chemistry program at the University of Minnesota already does is it teaches students to kind of think for themselves. I think with a building or a classroom that allows that to be done more effectively, you're going to see even better results with that.
Greetings from Duluth. As part of the University of Minnesota's request list, UMD is asking for $1.6 million to design the renewal of the oldest building on the UMD campus. Now, this facility is still a very solid structure, but it needs attention. And this renovation will allow us to provide outstanding learning facilities for our students. It will help us add students in major programs of high demand. And it will also help us meet additional regional and state workforce needs for many years to come.
Welcome to UMD and welcome to Swenson College of Science and Engineering. I'm Wendy Reed and I'm the Dean of Swenson College. Right now we're standing in front of what we call the old chemistry building or the science building, old science building that we're talking about renovating.
Being that chemistry was the first building built on this campus, all of the steam and the heating and the electrical services started in that building. And as buildings were built onto the site and connected, they spider-webbed out from chemistry. Since we're all connected, it's very difficult to chop a building out of the mix. And to be able to say, oh, it's easier to tear down a building and build a new one, it's very difficult and very expensive to do that in the footprint of the UMD campus.
And so it definitely needs a renovation to fit how we do science right now and how we do computer science in particular. That's one of the departments that'll be in this building. And this is a program that is growing, that we see demand from students and from industry to have more computer science majors produced for the workforce.
STEM programs across the state and the upper Midwest are huge. And we need to keep up with the times and be cutting edge to attract those students, and without updating facilities, without building new facilities if you have the opportunity, those folks will lose out, and of course UMD's enrollment will be not increased by those students who can't come here.
You know, when the building was built, we had a different sense of space and how we use space. Right now, our vision for the space, it's all about building community. So space and community are so tight with how we experience community and how we have spaces where faculty can interact with students in the hallways, and that space between the classroom or the department's office is really reduced, and that really reflects UMD's mission of that faculty-student interaction. This is another chance for us to build a model for how education can be for the future with a department, computer science, that is really forward-thinking and about discovery for the future of how we interact with technology.
As I noted in my earlier remarks, The state's $7.7 billion projected surplus for the next 2 years provides an opportunity for the state to make a transformational investment in higher education and accelerate the university's strategic initiatives. This begins with public safety. The University of Minnesota has continuously prioritized campus safety to enhance the university experience and support the campus community. Accordingly, the university is requesting $100 million in additional safety and security personnel and adding safety infrastructure and the monitoring of our campuses across the system. This funding would also help prevent unauthorized access to our most sensitive information and help protect against cybersecurity threats. We are also asking the state for an additional $85 million in one-time funding to help us accelerate our sustainability efforts across the system. $75 million of this funding would be for energy and sustainability planning, on-campus solar, conversion of campus vehicles from gas to electric, and a significant investment in geothermal hot water heating for the campuses. This will address one of the largest components of the university's carbon footprint, the heating and cooling of our buildings. The remaining $10 million of funding is for new facilities at the Natural Resources and Research Institute. These facilities will provide funding for water and mine land remediation lab expansion in Duluth, as well as a new mineral processing and metallurgy lab in Coleraine. Finally, the university has requested additional resources from the state to help increase access to the U of M and reduce the cost of attendance for Minnesota residents. To explain that, I'd like to welcome the Chancellor of our Rochester campus, Lori Carroll, to talk more about this proposal and how it will impact her campus, as well as around the system. Thank you, Lori.
Good morning and welcome from the Rochester campus of the University of Minnesota. It's wonderful to be with you today on this balmy January morning, or at least to be inside. As JD mentioned, the third component of the university's 2022 supplemental budget request focuses on student access and reducing cost of attendance burdens. This exciting proposal builds on existing university financial aid programs and aims to help even more students succeed at the University of Minnesota. The proposal provides a significant impact toward reducing student debt via a three-pronged approach. First, our request would expand income eligibility within the existing UPromise program, as well as increase its annual award amount. Bottom line, at least 3,000 additional students will be eligible for UPromise funds to support their University of Minnesota education. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Second, our request creates the Greater Minnesota Scholarship Program to target additional financial aid support for Minnesota undergraduates enrolled on the Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester campuses. This new scholarship will attract more students to these campuses by providing nearly 9,000 students with four-year scholarships when fully phased in. In their first year, their award would be $3,000 to $4,000, and in their subsequent years, $4,000 to $5,000 awards. And finally, our request focuses on student success, enhancing students' retention by proactively addressing barriers to degree completion with increased services in mental health, tutoring, financial literacy, and academic advising. I'm just thrilled about these potential programs and the positive impact they could have on current and prospective students here in Rochester and, of course, across the University of Minnesota system. We're a campus, as you know, that is dedicated to academic innovation, and we are cultivating the next generation of Minnesota's healthcare workforce. UMR serves a diverse population of students. 70% are from underrepresented backgrounds, including BIPOC, first generation, and Pell eligible students. The talent demand in Minnesota's healthcare industry is intense, and so are the challenges students face to complete their college degree, including those financial challenges. The university's 2022 supplemental budget request will make a difference for UMR students and their families. Again, thank you for joining us this morning. We're excited to work with all of you during this upcoming legislative session.
Thank you, Chancellor Carroll. The 2022 session will be an historic session as well as fascinating to watch. From the budget surplus to redistricting to the upcoming elections, it'll be a fast-paced and consequential few months ahead. To help us sort it all out, it's my pleasure to welcome University of Minnesota political science professor Catherine Pearson and some of Minnesota's top political reporters to help us better understand the ins and outs of the upcoming session and the state of Minnesota politics overall.
Great, thank you. It is my pleasure to moderate this roundtable with four of Minnesota's best state politics reporters, including Brian Batts from Minnesota Public Radio, Brianna Bierschbach from the Star Tribune, Peter Callahan from MinnPost, and Dana Ferguson from Forum News Service. I have several questions about the legislative outlook for 2022, but I want to start by discussing the current political and economic context and what it means for policymaking at the state capitol in 2022. Partisan politics, divided government, redistricting in the upcoming 2022 elections, the budget surplus, and COVID will shape the legislative process and policy outcomes. I will ask each of you about one of these factors. And I'll start with Brian. Brian, Minnesota is one of only 13 states in 2022 with divided government, where the governor is of a different party than at least one legislative chamber. Across the country, Republicans have unified party control of the governor's mansion and state houses in 23 states and Democrats in 14 states. How does divided government in Minnesota, where the governor, Tim Walz, is a Democrat or DFLer, and Republicans control the state Senate and the DFL control the state House, affect policymaking?
Well, as we've seen for the last few years, it really slows things down. There have been very few big decisions made early on, and this is a session where there are some big decisions that are front-loaded for lawmakers, and so they're really going to have to test this pace that they've been on, where everything gets pushed until May or beyond. The governor and legislative leaders have struggled to reach even easy deals around this place, and there are a lot of decisions that should be made, might be made, and may not be made in this session, given that there's so much money to go around and it's an election year with everybody on the ballot coming in November.
Thank you. I want to delve deeper into the election year politics. And this question is for Brianna. In 2022, Governor Walz and every state house and state Senate seat will be on the ballot. At this point, though, we aren't yet sure where district boundaries will be, where these legislators will run from. Could you briefly explain the redistricting process and what is likely to happen, and how redistricting and election year politics will shape the upcoming session?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we're basically in the middle of it right now. Once every decade after the census count, the legislators are required in law and to essentially redraw the boundaries to equally distribute the population amongst them after population shifts over the last decade. Sounds easy enough, but it's always a fight. Legislators, we've always had divided government when this process has happened as well. So they've never actually gotten to the finish line and drew maps that were passed into law. So the courts have been had to come in behind them and draw the maps instead. That is expected to happen again. The courts are already in the process of probably putting their heads down and drawing those maps right now. February 15th is the deadline. So we'll know then if the legislators come to an agreement. And if they don't, the maps will be released from the courts that day is our expectation. And those will set sort of the fortunes of the legislative caucuses, as well as in our congressional districts for the next decade to come. Even slight changes in the lines can add in a more conservative area or more liberal area to a district. In the maps we've seen from both parties, we've noticed that the second district in Congress and the first district in Congress have really been a focus of both parties because they have been the swingiest in the past. But something I'm also watching on the legislative side is how many metro area districts are created in the legislature because of population shifts. How do the rural districts shake out? So it's going to be really important for this election and election for the next decade.
Thank you. Do you expect that many legislators will be running against one another, that seats will be drawn where there are two legislators in one seat?
Definitely. That happens every year. There's always pairings. It was interesting. The Democratic maps and the Republican maps both put more pairings for the other party, which always happens. It'll be interesting to see what the courts do. They tend to favor a least changed map, ones that just move the lines a little bit to help, redistribute the population and meet some other principles that they've laid out. But there's no doubt there will be pairings.
And it also seems like, as a function of redistricting or perhaps other factors, we're seeing an unusually large number of retirements. Have you noticed that?
Yes, we've seen a number pre-session already, including one today. Representative Paul Marquardt, who's been in the legislature for decades and is chair of the taxes committee. I think we're going to see even more when people realize who they might be facing off against, or even if this district isn't something they is so different than what they represent now that they don't feel like they want to continue representing it going forward.
Great. Thank you. I want to now turn to Peter and ask about Minnesota's unexpectedly large budget surplus, which seems to keep increasing, of somewhere around $8 billion. Correct me if I'm wrong about that number. Well, this seems like great news for funding the priorities of legislators and groups pressing their interests alike. It could also lead to a lot of conflict. How do you see the budget surplus affecting this legislative session?
What I think should be noted by folks is we've had surpluses. And it's sort of been part of every budget year that there's been this surplus. And in the past, it was sort of like we could do this with it, or we could do that with it. We could do tax cuts, or we could do some spending. There's so much money available in this thing right now that you can do everything and still have money left over. And it also is interesting and important to note that they look out the next 2 biennia to see what will happen with the current spending and the current tax levels. For the first time in a while, a decade or two, you look out in these out years and you see surpluses as well. That's just not happened. And Mark Haveman from the Minnesota Center for Fiscal Excellence had some interesting numbers yesterday in his newsletter. He does not see a surplus at this level since he has to go back to 1999. When the surplus was 15.6% of projected spending. This one is 14.9%. And if you want to throw in the unspent American Rescue Plan money, and it's green, you can spend it just like you can spend general fund money. It takes it up to 17% of the budget is sitting there in surplus. So, 3 choices. You give everybody a little bit of what they want. You do nothing and hope you have the majorities yourself and you don't have to compromise, or you do just a few things, just kind of get by through session. The spending demands are tremendous right now. And the governor has hinted he's open to tax cuts because I think he knows that you have to do something that the Republicans want in order to get any of the things he wants.
So do you think that election year politics will sort of have the parties come together so that everybody wins something, or just increase the conflict because neither side wants the other to have a victory to talk about?
The past has said you do nothing for several months. You predict that everything is going to fail. And then at one moment to midnight, you come up with the global deal that the leaders and the governor come up with. The wild card is Paul Gazelka was very good at that, and we just don't know how Senator Miller will act in his stead as majority leader in the Senate.
Hey, Catherine, can I jump in here?
Yes, I was going to say, I want to circle back to Brian with partisan polarization and to the extent to which it's increased.
Well, one other point that's a wild card here is that if they do nothing, the governor gets to spend that additional $1 billion that the legislature didn't spend last year from the federal government. So there is an incentive for Republican senators to meet him somewhere in the middle. What the middle is an open question, because a lot of lawmakers are also going to be hesitant to just blow it all in the session, because some of them are going to be coming back setting a new budget next year. Some are skittish about what the projections are, and if they are on par or if they're off, and they don't want to be facing a deficit situation the next year. So I would expect that even though we've got this tremendous surplus, not all of it will get spent, and part of the solution might be just getting each side a little bit of what they want and leaving the rest to fight over in the campaign and then in the next year's session.
Yeah, Brian, remember when $1 billion sounded like a lot of money?
But to follow up, so we've heard reports from the US Capitol that although we've seen partisan polarization increasing really for the last several decades, that it's worse than ever. in the wake of January 6th last year. Do you see that same kind of rise in partisan polarization and electoral competition that's become so personal at the Minnesota State Capitol that we're hearing about in Washington, D.C.?
The elbows are definitely sharper, and a lot of that has to do with the way that lawmakers communicate with their constituents and the way constituents communicate with their lawmakers. Social media has really added a new dynamic, and so people are a little more hesitant to cross the base back home. This information flows so fast back home. One vote can get you in a lot of hot water. So there's a lot more voting in line with what you think your district's party representation is. And as we've seen, Greater Minnesota has gotten far more Republican, and Metro Minnesota has gotten far more Democratic. The real swing area is still those suburbs, and that's kind of where the moderation, if you're going to see moderation, will come from, and that's where the battle for control of the legislature will be fought.
I want to turn now to Dana and ask about COVID. Obviously, COVID persists. Indeed, recently, Michael Osterholm described the current situation in Minnesota as a COVID blizzard. What does the persistence of COVID and the political divide surrounding it mean for the legislative process in the upcoming year? And then if you could also reflect on what it's like to cover the legislature during COVID, that would be great too.
I think it's hard to imagine a legislative session where we're not going to hear quite a bit about COVID and the state's response to COVID in 2022. Looking back on the past two legislative sessions, it's been a very dominant factor, and it's completely changed the way that many of us have covered the Capitol. So much has gone to virtual hearings, and we see the split between the Minnesota Senate, where a lot more is happening in person, and we anticipate that in 2022 that will happen again. There are some discussions going on right now about whether there should be vaccine mandates or testing requirements for employees and interns, but those are not going to apply to lawmakers. Likely they will not apply to anybody visiting the Capitol, and it's unclear if masks will be required in that chamber. On the opposite side, we have the House, where the House Speaker has said, you know, these requirements are a floor, not a ceiling for what they're going to do. They've been allowing lawmakers to appear virtually, so a lot of people have been calling in or using Zoom to participate in floor speeches. I anticipate this year we'll see a lot of that, and just conversations more broadly about the pandemic are going to have to deal with such broad issues going on in the economy, businesses being impacted. Hospitals are sort of crying out for help and saying we need something to happen. Mind you, this is January 12th, and we're going to have an announcement today from the governor about what the state is going to do differently as the Omicron variant is surging. There's a chance in 2 weeks that things look really different. Hopefully things are better. We keep saying that, but it's hard to imagine that things are going to completely change and that COVID will be gone and we'll just have a normal session to deal with this year.
Is it harder to cover the session during COVID, and sort of is it harder for a citizen to meet with their legislators? If you would reflect on the implications for that.
I think it varies a little bit. It's nice to have the option for virtual hearings where they are available, but we don't have that in-person exchange as much as we used to. We can't be on the House floor talking to legislators as folks are debating or after they finish a conversation about a bill. And a lot of negotiations that we would be able to stake out at the Capitol before are happening remotely. The leaders are doing these things over Zoom, so we can't be outside the room where it's happening because we can't stake out a Zoom hearing. There's no way for us to do that. So beyond our ability to put pressure on elected officials to come talk to us after the fact and then hoping that will work for us, we just don't have the power as much to be there physically making them talk to us. And it's frustrating. I think my colleagues would agree it's been difficult.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to weigh in on the implications for transparency or accessibility?
Peter?
Well, it is difficult. It's oddly and unfortunately becoming the norm. And I try to assure leaders that it is different and it is worse for us, because often the speaker says, well, everything's on Zoom, everything's available. Hey, give us a call if you need us. There's just something about running into people in the hallway and being able to talk to people right after a committee hearing, which is impossible on a Zoom hearing. So it does make it harder, and I think not as good.
Great. Thank you. I want to turn to legislating specifically. We've touched on some of this, but I'm really interested in diving into the issues that will see the most attention in this session. What issues do legislators in each party prioritize? What does Governor Walz prioritize? And what compromises might be attained and what might be left behind in committee chambers, in person or on Zoom? This is a question for each of you, but if possible, I'd like each of you to really go deep on one legislative issue. And if we could start with Brian.
Well, I'll talk about an issue that Republicans are talking a lot about and want to put kind of in the front seat of the legislative session, and that's the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. As you recall, there was quite a run on that trust fund early in the pandemic when a lot of businesses were shut down under restrictions placed by the governor. The Minnesota had a hefty surplus in its unemployment fund, but had to exhaust that and had to borrow from the federal government. Republican lawmakers want to have the state push some of its surplus money or its federal money into that account to avoid having business taxes go up, because that's fed by business assessments. And right now, those business assessments have gone up. The state won't collect that extra money, or isn't due to the state until April. So there is time to get there and head off some of this. For Democrats, there's a big push to have a bigger hero pay fund. If you remember, toward the end of the special session in the summer, the legislature set aside $250 million that was supposed to be split among frontline workers for putting themselves at risk during the pandemic. Well, there's been a big debate over who qualifies as a frontline worker. Republicans came out with a plan that pretty much prioritized nursing home workers, healthcare workers, and some emergency personnel. And Democrats said it didn't go far enough. And there were other people who were at risk, whether that's janitors, grocery workers, teachers, childcare workers. And so those talks stalled out. I would imagine that given there's more money and you might be able to pair it with the unemployment fund issue, that those two things will get a quick airing in the session and perhaps a quick resolution.
Thank you. Brianna.
For the record, Brian took two things. I just want to say that, now we all have to pick up after him. And those are two things that I think everyone agrees you could really see some agreement or deal making around. The other big thing that is always a huge issue in off-year sessions is infrastructure, right? Usually a bonding bill is passed. Everyone always it seems to be on the same page. At the beginning of session, we want to do a bonding bill. But it always kind of takes until the end of session to get something done. Governor Walz is saying, he could see needs as high as $3 or $4 billion, but he's expecting to introduce a proposal around $2 billion. He's been traveling around the state highlighting specific projects, saying, I'm taking a different approach than other governors. I don't get to write the infrastructure bill, the bonding bill, the legislature does. So I'm going to say, here's where I think you should put the money, highlighting some projects in Minneapolis that will help BIPOC communities. He has gone up to Dilworth to highlight a fire department or a fire station that needs improvements and rebuilding up there. So that will be interesting to see how that shapes the debate at the legislature. Democrats in the House tend to go bigger than Republicans in the Senate, but that plus the federal infrastructure money that's coming in, this could be a really big year for infrastructure. And I think a lot of people tend to like those wins going out on, especially when you're going right out onto the campaign trail and all these newly drawn districts in the fall. And for the governor to go and want to talk about infrastructure spending in his race as well.
Great, thank you. We'll turn to Peter.
So I'm going to take three things just to leave Dana with absolutely nothing to talk about. So let's go out to the suburbs and let's kind of tie in with the election, because there's two issues, and I'll only talk about one of them, Dana, that are considered to be suburban campaign issues this year. The first one being criminal justice. And that is going to be in everyone's mailbox as soon as the mailings start going out for campaigns, whether or not legislator X sided with criminals or was anti-police or wanted to defund the police. Criminal justice is going to be the primary issue in the suburbs. And unfortunately, it appears that this is going to be one of those issues where they'll talk past each other because of the campaign implications. So the Republicans will definitely keep talking about police funding, police recruiting. DFLers will need to and want to continue to talk about criminal justice reforms. I think there'll be a lot of conversation about that. I'm not convinced there'll be any resolution. Do you want me to tell you what the other one is, Dana?
Yeah, go for it. I have a whole list. So
Good. Well, I think school governance and the idea that Republicans are definitely pushing that school boards are not listening to their parents and parents are not being included, having to do with masking, other COVID restrictions, critical race theory teaching, curriculum teaching. That's kind of a big issue that is also a suburban issue. And again, is one that I don't think gets resolved as much as it gets teed up as a campaign issue.
I would follow up on just some of the issues that are going to be, I anticipate, very present on the campaign trail. So anything that has to do with limiting the governor's ability to impose emergency powers or any sort of mandates. So anti-masking mandates, anything limiting emergency powers. I would anticipate on both sides bills related to abortion access, especially coming before the Supreme Court's decision this summer. I think that there will be meaningful conversation around supports for nursing homes and hospitals. That's a complex discussion though, setting Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates. So that might take a while. And then just kind of on the fringes issues, sports betting. I had another one. Oh, reforms around the state's liquor laws. Those are some issues where we've had division in the past, but it looks like there might be some bipartisan effort to get something done. So it's still divided government. So we'll see.
Thank you all. This is very helpful. So 2 final questions, and I'll let everyone weigh in on one or both. So with news of the budget surplus, the University of Minnesota increased its budget request to nearly $936 million. What do you think the prospects are for the University of Minnesota's request, given both the other legislative issues that we've talked about and the requests in historical context? And then what advice do you have for those advocates for the University of Minnesota who are watching this session about how to best advocate for the University of Minnesota at the Capitol and with their individual legislators? And anyone feel free to jump in first. This is for all.
The university is in a long line of people and entities requesting new funds. And it appears that the university is taking the bid high, hopefully come in somewhere just in a better position out of the legislative session. And we're going to see a lot of that. I mean, there are a lot of groups that see the surplus with big wide eyes and say, now's the time. If you've turned me down in the past, now's the time to invest in priority X, Y, or Z. The groups that tend to be the most successful are the ones who can actually show here's what the outcome, here's what the result of this funding is, whether it be, we can raise student achievement by X amount or reduce the tuition burden by a certain amount. Lawmakers really want these tangible answers so they can go back and say, I voted for this because I was told, and I can check on later to hold the entity accountable, that this is what was going to happen if we come through with more money.
I think U of M grad Brianna Birschbach should go next.
I'm trying to avoid a situation where my dog barks in the background, but maybe she might be done. It is a big request. And I think Brian's absolutely right? I think because the number is so large, it sort of increases people's imagination, it expands the boundaries of what they think can possibly be done with it. And that's a pretty common approach to try to get more. And there are lots of needs out there, right? As exposed by the pandemic. When people are lobbying, I think it's a totally different world now because of COVID. We're not at the Capitol. You're not there to, make your case person to person. So it is harder. I do think, I always tell people to know the legislator you're talking to, or trying, know who you're specifically going for. If you're talking to the chairs of the committees that you specifically need to address your issue, that's important. Legislators are super busy. Also appeal to your own district legislator, right? I mean, individual legislators tend to prioritize their committee work and their constituents, and they get lots of form emails. Don't send out form emails or form requests saying, fill in your name here and here's what we want. They tend to ignore those because they get a lot. They really want kind of personal appeals, and I think those things tend to work better than some of the kind of more kind of email blasty, approaches that some groups have used in the past.
Great. And Dana and Peter, if you want to jump in very quickly, we need to wrap up, but I'd love to hear just brief insight from each of you.
I would just add too that being able to show more than just a local benefit, sort of more of a statewide benefit to anything, is helpful for certain groups of legislators. And obviously the U has that capacity because there are multiple campuses. So it seems like it might be a little bit easier.
Great, thank you.
I'll just say fewer press conferences.
I love it. Okay, well, I really want to thank 4 of Minnesota's best state political reporters: Brian Bax from Minnesota Public Radio, Brianna Bierschbach from the Star Tribune, Peter Callahan from MinnPost, and Dana Ferguson from Foreign News Service. You've really given us great context and advice for our listeners, and we very much appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you, Regal, Champ, Pounce, Rocky, and Goldie. I could watch our mascots advocate all day. It never gets old or boring to me. A wonderful aspect of being a University of Minnesota advocate is the ability to join your colleagues and friends from around our system, state, and nation as we work together to move the University of Minnesota forward. Collectively, the University of Minnesota system is driving our future economy and creating the next generation of leaders, innovation, and discovery. It's truly 5 strong campuses for 1 strong state. Individually, our 5 campuses have unique attributes, constituencies, alumni, and advocates who care deeply about these institutions and share a commonality with supporters around the state. We encourage you now to join with one of those campuses in a breakout webinar for the remainder of our time together. You'll see a link on the page with options to choose to go live with one of our campuses and campus leaders to learn more about efforts underway and how to engage with the campus community and elected officials. We encourage you to travel virtually to one of these campuses for the few minutes left that we have together this morning. Again, thank you for joining us for the legislative kickoff for the 2022 legislative session. A special thanks to the Board of Regents, President Gable, my team in University Relations, our campus chancellors around the system, and the Office of Information Technology, and everyone else who had a role in making this event happen this morning. Thank you. And don't forget to make sure you signed up to be an advocate at our UMN Advocates website at advocates.umn.edu, as well as our U of M Government Relations website to get more information and learn more about our legislative efforts. And keep an eye out in future communications for additional information. With that, have a wonderful rest of the day and enjoy your virtual trip to one of our campuses. Thank you.